All right, here's part 4 of the Southern Colonies. Let's talk about the Carolinas, North and South Carolina. Okay. All right, 1663, the King of England, I believe at this point was either Charles the First or Charles the Second. It'll probably say here in a second. I just can't remember. But the King of England granted a charter for a new Carolina colony. Carolina was the land south of Virginia and north of the Spanish-controlled Florida down here. Okay. Colony was owned by 8 dudes, 8 proprietors. Sometimes you might hear people say, who's the proprietor of this joint? That's the owner. So we'll talk about them. Okay. All right. Yeah, it was Charles II. So King Charles II gave a royal charter to these 8 English noblemen, rich dudes, known as the Lords Proprietors. They named their new colony Carolina, from the Latin Carolus, or Charles. So Charles in Latin is Carolus, and so Carolina comes out of that Carolus. So the Lords Proprietors had helped to get Charles II back on the throne to become king. Remember, his dad had his head chopped off, and William Penn's family hit him out, and William Penn's dad was one of them that helped out getting him back on the throne. He was not one of the Lords Proprietors, though. William Penn's dad was not. Okay. So, but even before Carolina officially became its own colony down here, a lot of colonists from the southern part of Virginia here had started moving down into this area, building little villages, farming in the northern part of it, in what eventually become called the Carolina colony. In the beginning, there was only one colony. Okay, it was all connected together. So it was located between Virginia up here, English-controlled, and Spanish-controlled Florida. And so they got, being down the south, they got some people from different places that came as immigrants to settle there. You had people from Virginia that were English. People from the Caribbean came up. Okay, so I think the one map we saw, there was like areas of red around in here, which were actually, black people, some people from Africa, some people from the Caribbean islands that started their own little colonies before they were, probably taken into slavery later on. And some French Protestants. Protestants are people that aren't Catholics, but still Christians. Remember the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther? So in France, I think the next slide here I'll show you. Yeah, in France, okay, they wanted to stay Catholic. They weren't doing the whole let's break away and form the Church of England kind of thing. They were still Catholics, and anybody who didn't want to be a Catholic was prosecuted or persecuted, religious persecution in France. So there was this group of people known as the Huguenots, not super important for you to know, but they were some of the French Protestants that moved to the Carolinas and became some of the residents there. Not super important. Okay, one of the last things the Lords Proprietors did was they set up a government for the Carolina colonies. They wrote a constitution, kind of like some of the other colonies had done, called the Fundamental Constitution of Carolina. It allowed the colonists to make a couple laws themselves, but mostly the power was still in the hands of the 8 Lords Proprietors and King Charles II of England. Okay, just kind of a little facade sort of government to let the people think they had some power. Okay, pretty ineffective, basically because the King of England and the Lords Proprietors were 3,000 miles away in England. There's a lot of ocean to cover there to try to keep things straight over here. So by 1693, the whole fundamental constitution of the Carolinas was abandoned, and a government led by the colonial leaders was basically established. They still had to answer to the king, and the Lords Proprietors were pretty much out of it by now. But, okay, so they had their own little form of government. All right. Let's see. We'll make this a short video. We come back, we'll talk about some of the cash crops and things that were grown down into the Carolinas. Okay, so this was part 4. We come back, we'll dig into part 5.